be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, the founder of Fearless Fastpitch, mental performance coach and softball instructor, Amanda Schaefer. Coach AB, thank you for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm excited to get into this, but I am going to warn you, the first question I ask, it may lead to a fight, but I've really got to know, how do you possibly think that Backstreet Boys are better than NSYNC?
You found one of my old Instagram posts. Classic. I'll listen to all 90s. I really, going with the OG Backstreet Boys. We'll go with that debate topic. They're the OG.
That's fair. That's fair. They were first. So, tell me, when you started Fastpitch Softball or Fearless Fastpitch, I found something really interesting. Tell me about your meat trading side hustle.
You're bringing back all the topics. So if the Schilt family is listening to this, they will laugh. When I first started coaching, I was a poor college student, and we live in a very agricultural world. And what Charles means by meat trading is one of my very first pitching lessons. I didn't know what to charge, and they said, let's trade some meat. So I had a freezer full of meat. I lived high on the hog, and I had steaks, and I was happy in return for pitching lessons. That's really how I got started coaching.
I love that. I think that's such a great thing. And I do think the bartering system is like not utilized enough, because there are some ways to get started and to build some things that you can definitely just trade values for. And I think that's such an awesome story. But you've built quite a following since then. I mean, you've reached over 13,000 plus followers on Instagram and Facebook. So tell me a little bit about that journey from meat trader to now social media influencing many young athletes, coaches, and people of that nature.
Yeah. I when I look back at my journey, I find it ironic in that coaching was never really on my radar. I just wanted to serve. And there were little points along my journey where I realized, I struggled with the mental side of the game. I struggled with physical injuries. And the first couple of years I gave lessons just because I felt like it was my way to give back to the game. I didn't really see it going anywhere. It was just something that I did on the side, but I really enjoyed the time that I spent with my athletes, and getting to know them and getting to know their parents and building those relationships. You're getting to know the families. The dads and the moms are sitting on the bucket every week, and those relationships are built. You kind of get to know what their athlete needs. And one of the things that kept standing out to me was, how do I take my confidence and my dominant personality as a pitcher on the mound? How do I bottle that up? How do I teach that to athletes? And I'll never forget this. If my mom listens to this, she will laugh. I took her to a tournament in Kansas City. I was coaching, and it was a great mother-daughter trip. And we were just sitting in the hotel room, and she asked me, what made you love pitching so much? And why don't we see as many dominant pitchers. And she didn't mean dominant in the physical sense. She meant dominant in you loved it so much, you had a passion for playing, nothing really kept you down. And it's not that I didn't have negative thoughts. It's not that I didn't have fears. I had all those. It's what I did in spite of those. And that really got me thinking. Gosh, that would have been a couple years post-college. So we're talking probably 8 or 10 years ago. It wasn't until 2019 that I actually started diving into the mental performance world. And when I opened that chapter of my life, it was this epiphany of, oh my gosh, we can actually teach this. There are real skills. And so just as much as I learned how to be a pitching coach, it was this discovery of, we can teach visualization. We can teach self-talk. There is research behind this. Where was this when we played? And how do I give this to my girls? So it's definitely something that was never on my radar, but it was just coming from a place of how do I serve these girls? What do they need? And then matching them with the resources. And there really weren't a lot of resources out there. So I created them.
No, I find it interesting too, because you were talking about dominance, and I look at it almost like a presence. Like there's this difference when you see that person who carries themselves with this presence of confidence that no matter what happens, it's unshakable. But I don't see it as much as I used to. I feel like there's this, because of, I don't know, external forces or whatever it may be, there aren't as many people who walk around, you know, shoulders back, chest out. I'm bigger than the world. I can take on any challenge no matter what happens. What do you attribute this to? Why are we seeing maybe not as much of this? Some people might call it arrogance, but this confidence and ability that goes beyond just, I can do well in practice.
Yeah, I think part of that is just being realistic with the generational changes. Rhonda Revelle has been an amazing mentor of mine, and one of her proddings to me was do some research. And she really pushed me to research Gen Z. And, you know, I'm a millennial, and then you have Gen X, and we have baby boomers, and you have all this research, which is really fascinating. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it, but what this generation brings, this next generation of athletes, is an uncanny ability to understand what they're up against. And they have so much access and so much pressure put on them. We didn't have Game Changer. We had a paper book. Our stats weren't broadcasted to Twitter. Recruiting wasn't as crazy. Yes, we recruited younger, but I vividly remember my signing day was in the corner of the library on a random day of the week. There weren't huge signing days. Signing days were for big, you know, Division I football players. And now we have signing days, and we have uniform days. And I got an offer. We're announcing offers on Twitter. So I think with the rise of social media, I think with the rise of live stats, and then COVID catapulted us into live streaming. So not only is your performance and your statistics out there for the world to see, the entire game feed is live. So college coaches are watching this, parents are watching this. There's an immense pressure that we never had to deal with. And so I tip my hat to this next generation. They're dealing with a lot, and they're doing it fairly well. They're performing well. The bats are hotter. They have more access to lessons, more access to education. So on the flip side of that, I think they have an incredible opportunity to have access to things that we never had access to, which is cool.
Yeah. So how do you balance, and how do you help your young athletes not get swept up in the online popularity and the seeking likes and the want to be famous online type of environment that we live in?
Yeah, I think it goes back to coaching them on who they are. And you won't find that in mental performance skills. We really start with the athlete as a person. And sometimes those are the most fruitful conversations, when you can tell an athlete, hey, at the end of the day, who are you? Like, who is Josie? Who is Amelia? Who is Jordan? And nobody can take that away from you. And, you know, if you want to talk about greatness, what makes you great? And how do you tap into that? And when you start to realize, what are those things that make my athlete, you know, if I'm talking to a parent or a coach, what's something that can be never defined by your performance, never defined by a coach? And then how do we coach our athletes on that? I think is incredibly empowering. And that just starts with getting to know your athletes and understanding who is this person in front of me, which I think helps. It not only helps with their confidence, but it helps with understanding, wow, softball is actually something that I do, not who I am.
No, I think that's a valuable point because I think a lot of times, especially today, you're playing your sport year round. So it's really easy to get swept up in this is who I am because it's what I'm always doing,
Yeah.
not this is who I am in this moment and I'm more than this outside of it. But we get so caught up in this every single day we're doing the same thing and it's all year round. There's no breaks that it's easy to see that you get stuck thinking, I am this person. And
Yeah.
when it ends, which let's be honest, in the softball world, it happens sooner than even the baseball world for a lot of young women because there's not a whole lot of opportunities once college is over. It's limited. So how do you help transition those athletes from that final day to what we do next?
Yeah. I think that's an incredible and heavy and exciting question at the same time. I mean, it's the same question as what do you want to be when you grow up? And I guess my first response would, we don't have to figure that out now. We just have to trust that we're going to get there. And if we do the work ahead of time, if I can get to these athletes, if we can get to these athletes as coaches and parents when they're 8, 9, 10, or 11, 12, 13, and we start talking to them about these, what does it mean to be great? And how do we stay motivated? And how do we become mentally strong? I think if we start building this foundation, everything will start to ripple effect by the time they're 18, so that when we're having that conversation when they're 18 or 22, whenever they graduate college, they've already done the work. And I think the girls that I've worked with will tell you that, in that it's not anything that we coach them on. It's kind of this self-discovery that they realize, oh, Coach AB taught me all these really cool skills because I wanted to be better at softball, but I can also use this for the classroom or for my job in the workforce. And we just look at them and wink and go, yeah, we knew.
Yeah,
We knew.
I love that. And I think that's such a valuable thing because I agree. I think the sports world can teach us so much about life. Can you tell me a little bit about how your experience as a softball player now impacts you in your daily life?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I could talk about this as an entrepreneur. I could talk about this as a mom. I think about the times where it was hard. I think about, the 6 a.m. workouts and working towards something that was bigger than myself, and how to be selfless and how to be a good teammate and how to communicate. I think all of those things, I think about my most impactful friendships that I've kept have all been related to softball. And, we're all getting married and having kids, and, a lot of us are coaching, and I still keep in touch with some of those friendships. And I think back to, more than anything, it's that support system to be able to say, I have coaching conversations. I have conversations about being a mom, and just knowing that you're not alone and that we're not perfect, and that if I can fail in softball, there are going to be times that I'm going to fail and drop the ball as a mom, as a business owner, as a wife, as a friend. And so it's what you do in those moments that matters. And I think about those life lessons are far more valuable than even the how to hit a ball or how to teach pitching. And you don't realize that until you're on the other side of it.
Yeah. Do you think with all of the travel sports and recruiting stuff and signing early and these different huge tournaments that coaches are losing sight of the value of the life lessons of sports and they're focusing too much on the wins in the moment?
I will be the first to tell you that I fell into that trap.
Tell me more.
It's interesting because I say this because it's easy to say, hard to do. I actually found myself in the trenches of that. I coached a high school program for 3 years, and I never wanted to be that coach that focused on the wins and losses. But when you're in it, you get enwrapped in, what's my starting lineup and how do I move these position players around and what shifts are we doing and what pitches are we calling, that you get so deep in the weeds that sometimes it takes a mentor or your support system or somebody to bounce an idea off of to say, oh my gosh, I need to take a step back. I have lost sight of what I'm here to do. And There were times as a young coach, I think about, I coached a summer program, same thing. You get a couple of years into it and you say, man, these athletes are really talented. And you just assume, well, they know that I'm proud of them. They know what we're doing. And if I could go back and tell myself as a young coach, and I'm currently not coaching, on the field, but if I could go back and either tell my young self this, or in the future, I would do it differently. I would remind myself every day, why are we here? How can I serve these girls? Who are these women in front of me, and what do they need? And that's where I missed the mark. You can't assume that your players know that you're proud of them, and they crave the feedback. And so often, as a hitting coach or a pitching coach, our job is to give them feedback on, what they need to fix and what they need to do wrong. But then on the flip side of that, it can be very easy to get lost in, oh my gosh, what are they doing that's right? And what am I seeing that's intangible? You know what? You had a crappy game today, but you were there for your teammates and you kept the energy the whole time. And I know it's hard right now, or hey, I notice that you've been down lately, but you're still here. And I'm really proud of you for that. And those moments will get your athletes to fight for you so much, and fight for each other, because it's connecting with the person. So all that to be said, I know I'm starting to ramble, but it's the person. We can't forget the person and the purpose. And as long as you keep coming back to that, of course, we're going to get caught up in wins and losses, especially when you have talented athletes. It happens to the best of the best of the best coaches.
Yeah. No, and I agree. I think the hard thing too is because, in my opinion, sports are played to be won. That's why you're playing. It's a competition. You're not just playing to play. That's what the rec leagues are for. That's what the developmental stages are for. But if you get to a high enough level, you are trying to win. But balancing that, everybody on the team has value, and we're going to try to win. And how does everybody contribute is definitely a challenge. And it's one that I don't think we can answer in an hour podcast, but I thought it would be an interesting one to go down that road. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I'm curious. So with a name like Fearless Fastpitch, I'm really curious about your relationship with fear.
Yeah. My relationship with fear is, what do we do in spite of our fears? And if fearless means that I can move forward despite my fears, will I ever be fearless? No. Am I aware of fear? Yes. I talk about fear, in that fear is sneaky. Fear hides itself in negative self-talk. Fear hides itself in difficult situations. And the more that you can become self-aware, a fearless warrior is somebody that knows what they're up against and they choose to move forward. I mean, we talk about courage, we talk about fears and negative thoughts. I think one of the things out there that I wish I could shout from the mountaintops, if I could tell one athlete, or every athlete and parent and coach, is that the goal is not to get rid of the fears. The goal is not to get rid of the negative thoughts. It's what you do with it that matters. And once you realize that, you can stand in face of your fears, whether that's on the softball field or beyond the chalk lines. That's really what we mean when we say fearless.
No, I love that. And I'm a big believer that the fear that we have is an important fuel to our success, because if we didn't fear something, we don't care about it, or there wasn't any uncertainty, and that uncertainty is where we grow. And so it's an interesting thought, but I love this idea of fearlessness. I love this idea of facing your fears. I guess my next question would be is, how do we get kids to stop looking at the failure piece as a fear part?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's, what are you making that mean? It's asking the right questions. It's going back to that self-awareness is, what does it mean that we just failed? Well, it means that you're pushing yourself. If you take, I like to give really concrete examples, because I think the work that we do is not as concrete. What is greatness? What is fearlessness? How do we be confident? In order to make these things concrete, we have to give our athletes examples. So if you think about a kid in a cage that's trying to hit the back of the cage, we're just trying to hit line drives. We're working on something in their swing. What does it mean if we're failing? Well, are we trying something new? Have we changed something in your swing? And let's just take a look at the factors. Would anyone in your situation fail? What are we trying to accomplish here? And then when you succeed, that's the mark of progress. If we succeeded right away, we wouldn't have known what worked. What did we change? It's an experiment. And if you look at life as an experiment, if we're working on getting your back hip engaged, something very specific, and it doesn't click until, the fifth or sixth rep, and then they're starting to notice, hey, I'm getting my back hip engaged, and therefore I'm seeing results, then they know, oh, this leads to success. But if we experience success right away, how do we know how to duplicate that? So we look at failure as the science lab. Of course, I want you to fail in the cages. That's the time to fail. Fail in cages, fail in your backyard, fail with mom and dad, fail.
I think I lost you there. Are you back? Sorry. My internet connection apparently is unstable.
All good.
Yeah. So I lost you there right at the end when you were talking about fail with mom and dad, fail in the cages. But I agree. I think the failure piece is an important part of our growth. But here's another interesting thought with this is that I've been doing a lot of time looking at the relationship of how luck plays into success. And in a sport like softball and a sport like baseball, you can hit a ball in the screws, but it's right at somebody. That's unlucky, right? So that's clearly one of those situations where you didn't do anything wrong. Your outcome didn't end up the way you want it. So how would you describe this situation, or how would you coach to this situation with an athlete when they're struggling with their confidence because the outcomes aren't going their way, but they're doing things right? They just can't see it.
Yeah, I think it keeps going back to that self-awareness piece. What are you making that mean? And again, really giving them concrete examples. So, maybe on a coaching call, ask an athlete, who's your idol? Who do you look up to? And, if they say an athlete's name, well, if you rope one and it's a rocket and they rob you of your home run in center field, what would that athlete do? Oh, well, it's part of the game. And they can start to see if this is truly part of the game, even the greats deal with it. And are you allowed to be frustrated? Yeah. I would be frustrated too. We get frustrated as parents and coaches. There's a level of frustration in our game because of that component of luck. And so it's like, go back to that self-awareness. What am I making this mean? Does it mean something about me as a hitter? Well, no. Does it mean something about me as a person? Well, no. Is it frustrating? Yes. Am I allowed to be frustrated? Yes. Okay. Noted. How do I want to move forward?
I love that. I think that's a valuable point too, because luck is such a big part of our success. You can have a hitter that's not very good, but flare balls in between spaces and hit 500. And I think that's one of the hard things about when you look at batting averages. And like you said earlier, Game Changer puts it all out there for everyone, but that doesn't tell the whole story. That doesn't tell what you need to know about this athlete. It just shows you a specific number on things. And I think that that's one of the challenges that we're facing right now is because we have so much information, because there's so many things in front of us giving us that number, how do we get kids to look away from statistical outcomes and then, like you said, focus inward on who they are? But I guess bigger picture is build that confidence of their processes.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and again, making it concrete. What does process over outcome mean? How do you define that? How do you define that for an athlete? And, what is a process goal? So, if I'm speaking to coaches, how do you define the process? What does the process look like? Maybe for a kid, a process is I'm going to, attack with my hips. I'm going to make sure that if I'm working on my stance or my grip, or if I'm learning a new pitch, what is the process that I can commit to? Did I do my spin work as a pitcher every single week? Did I actually show up when I needed to outside of pitching lessons or hitting lessons? And taking it in a very concrete way, what are those check boxes? Instead of just saying to an athlete, process, give them concrete. I have weekly process goals for me, I send out a Mental Tip Monday email every single Monday to my audience. And if I don't do that process, I'm not staying true to me serving and impacting in my business. And so, what are those process goals as a mom, as a, building a family? I have to do the laundry. I have to do the dishes. We have to put dinner on the table. And those are all process goals in hopes that what are we trying to accomplish? And so, healthy, happy families, healthy, happy softball players, baseball players, whatever that is, if you work backwards, what are the check boxes that I'm going to commit to regardless of, luck or regardless of the stats? And that can be incredibly fun too, if you wanted to challenge your athletes and say, hey, you told me you wanted to hit, 300 this season. What's that going to take? Hitting 3 times a week, coach. Okay, great. You told me that number. Every week, I want you to bring me your scorecard and we get to see. And then when you have that proof and they have all those check boxes and they start to see the progress that they made, that's where confidence comes from. Their self-efficacy of realizing, I did this. This was coach, I did this. And I think we forget that too, is that the confidence piece is not just saying, act confident, feel confident, practice your confidence and practice your mental skills. There is a component of preparation and the physical and tactical side that has to marry with the mental side too.
No, that makes sense. So one of the things that I notice is, as a strength coach, I get to work with a bunch of athletes all the time. And so I've worked with hundreds of female athletes. And one thing that consistently happens is almost all of them begin to doubt their strength in the weight room. They don't believe they're as strong as they are. Like, they come in and they'll do something and they're like, oh, that was heavy. But I see them move and I know you've got at least 40 more pounds. Like, you're not even close to your maximum potential, but there's this confidence in their abilities that's lacking in their actual performance outcomes. So that's one of the things that I see on a regular basis, is that they just don't understand what their bodies are capable of from a performance output. What's something that you see with a lot of your young athletes when it comes to them losing their confidence, and where they struggle the most to gain confidence?
Yeah. The brain craves proof. The brain wants to latch onto either the known or the unknown. And you think about where the most anxiety comes from. If you get a kid underneath a bar and it's her max and she's never done that weight before, her brain is going to, I've never experienced this before. The brain likes to know the knowns. And so in the unknown, that's where panic, anxiety, we freeze up. We can't tactically perform loose and to our true potential. So the more that you can tap into proving to that athlete, hey, Josie, what proof do you have that you've gotten stronger? And what numbers can we attach to that? So, maybe you look at the start of the summer and you say, hey, I just wanted to remind you that when you first walked in my doors, you struggled to put 25s on, and now you've got plates on, whatever that progress is, and help them to see, oh my gosh, you're right, coach. I did this. I've built this progress. And then what their focus is on is the knowns. They know that they have that capability. What that would look like for a hitter. Let's say a hitter's in a slump and you say, okay, if you're focused on the unknowns, you're looking at your next at bat. What if I don't hit at my next at bat? And what if I stay in this slump forever? They're focusing on the unknown. And if we can go backwards and say, what proof do you have that you're a good hitter? When you keep your elbow in, when you engage your hips and you get a great hit, the triple you got off of, the extreme, at the Sioux Falls tournament or whatever that is, when they look at those poignant moments of proof, the brain will latch on to very real, physical, tangible results that produce those emotions, those endorphins of confidence. And it's not us telling them to be confident. It's them realizing their own power. So to kind of wrap that in a bow, a recap is the brain needs proof. And how do we get them to empower themselves to remember those moments? We're just simply pulling it out of them.
So to build off that, for example, I don't know what it is, but I feel like in any situation I can be successful. I don't know if that's just me being an arrogant person or this a level of confidence because of years of doing things, but I will try something knowing that I may fail, but I know I can figure it out. And there's this level of belief in myself that even if I've never done it, I can do it. How do we help young athletes when they go into the unknown without proof to carry that type of confidence? Because, like, for example, let's say that's the first time they're facing a pitcher who's throwing just absolute gas. They've never seen it. There's no social proof. This girl's just chucking smoke. And they all just look at her and go, we're never going to get a hit. I didn't even see the ball go by. How am I going to hit that? How do we build that confidence when they're faced with something there is no social proof for, there is no past experience, again, like, or a max out, like, yeah, you can say, okay, we built to this point, you're going to be fine. But how do we get them to look at those moments where there is uncertainty, that they're not sure, and have that confidence that, yeah, I got this?
Yeah. What are you making it mean? What happens if you've never faced this pitcher before? What's the worst case scenario? If you strike out, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If your goal is to make contact, have you made contact before? Sure. What is the one thing that you can control? And what, if you look at this as a science experiment, if you've never experienced this before, we look at it as, hey, this is a really great experiment. I trust my ability to figure it out and put myself in those situations where I kind of actually want to see what's going to happen. Right? So if we get that curiosity and lean in with curiosity and say, hey, if we're just treating this like a science experiment, don't you want to know if you can hit this pitcher? Don't you want to know if you can get this max? Let's find out. Let's see what you're capable of. And then if you don't get it, it means nothing of who you are. You're still awesome. You're the hardest worker in the weight room. You're a great athlete. This will not change. And they need that reminder, because their fear brain is barking at them. So even if they don't have that proof, again, I loved what you said about, I trust my ability to figure it out. If we lean in with curiosity, I think that's a great approach.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of always been my thing. Like, when I started the podcast, I'd never interviewed anybody before. When I started writing books, I'd never written before. Like, this is just, I'm like, it may be clunky at first. It may not sound great, but I believe that over time I'll get better, and I'm not afraid of the failure part. But I see so many kids that, like you said, they face this unknown, and instead of being brave and going into it, they go, yeah, I'm going to feel comfortable over here because I don't want to get made fun of on social media, or I don't want to, like, my friends to laugh at me, or I don't want to get benched because I made a mistake, or whatever the reason may be. And we just kind of avoid these things. And it makes me think of a post I saw you make where this fear, you were struggling with making posts. You said, am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? Am I helping enough? Does this look good enough? Do I look good enough? How do you manage those things in dealing with those thoughts and feeling that way in a world that operates so much through the social media lens?
Yeah. I think it goes back to knowing your why, knowing your core values. What am I here to do? And, if I'm just here to serve athletes, I can be vulnerable too and say, guys, I have these same fears. I have these same doubts. I worry about social media. Am I doing enough? I could be posting more reels and more posts. And if you just get to the core of it, what do they need to hear from me? And you can't get it wrong. And, if you think of that as a teammate, what do my teammates need from me? Well, I'm going to give my best effort. As a coach, what do my girls need from me? You can't get it wrong if it comes from an innate sense of service and just a desire to help. And I know that would sound weird for athletes, when they're in the box or when they're in the weight room, but you can't get it wrong. And once you realize you can't get it wrong, that's the magic of letting go of, what other people think of you, or even what you think of yourself is, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get it wrong. So how do I serve?
Do you think that athletes can learn from watching their coaches fail and own mistakes and be vulnerable and do those types of things?
Yes. I wish more coaches would do it. I don't think girls realize, pitch shifts, lineups, pitching rotations. They don't think about those because they're not on their radar, especially for the younger girls. But One of the pieces of advice that I always give parents when they're thinking about investing in mental skills training is just to check in with their daughters and saying, I don't know if you realize this or not, but I worry about, doing the right things for my boss at my job. And I worry about saying the right things as your dad. And I worry about, am I giving you the right tools? And if we are vulnerable, I think that's incredibly powerful too, to build that relationship and say, you're going to be dealing with these things even at my age, and we're not immune to it. I think sometimes, we think about the development of the brain, and, at around age 10 is when their cognitive development starts happening, where they become self-aware. How do we help them understand that this isn't just something that they're expected to master? We're all working on this. And if you can let them into that, I think it takes the pressure off of them expecting that they can't have emotions or that they're never going to have negative thoughts. And how do we do that? We let them in. We show them that they're not alone.
What do you hope your impact will be?
Oh man, I wish that I could just impact as many young women as possible to stand in their power. And the crazy thing is that has nothing to do with softball. I just want young women to be unapologetic, unafraid, find their passions, whether that's softball or not, and face this world with joy in spite of fears and negativity and setbacks. And I think about the ripple effect of that. And, if 10 years from now I disappear and all that's left is social media crumbs, I hope that that's the message that they get is you can stand in your power. You can take up space. You can own who you are and be unafraid to face this world, whatever the world throws at you.
No, I love that. So a big struggle for young athletes that I notice is comparison. What's something that you do to help redirect kids away from comparing themselves to others?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it all goes back to self-awareness. What is that thought? And how do we challenge those thoughts? So, if we think of general, how do we make that more concrete? What are you comparing? Well, I'm comparing my pitching speed. Well, what are you making that mean? And I know I've repeated that phrase. What are you making that mean? The key to mental performance is shifting that perspective, really getting to the root. What is that thought? And what is my expectation? And if you can get them to admit, maybe it's a radar speed, a pitching speed, maybe it's a batting average, or maybe it's, hey, I don't have a starting spot, or they made varsity as a junior and, I'm still on JV, whatever that is. It's not that thing. It's not the comparison. It's the thought about the comparison. So the example that I use is, I'm afraid of spiders. I hate spiders. They make me gag. It's not the spider that I'm afraid of. It's what I think the spider will do. So will the spider bite me? Will the spider crawl up my arm? Could the spider kill me? Whatever that is. I'm not afraid of the spider. I'm afraid of what the spider could do or what could happen with the spider. So the analogy translates to, it's not the comparison. It's the thoughts and fears that the comparison means and happen. If I never get that starting spot, or what if I never reach that level? What does that mean about me, or what will happen? And the more we can confront those fears, we realize, oh, that's kind of, it's not true, or it's silly, or I was really letting my fear run away with me,
Yeah, no, I get that for sure. And the creepy crawly of the spiders up the arms, that's enough to give you the little willies there, right there, for sure. So what I want to know now is how do you balance all that you do? Building a business, coaching, everything with raising a family and the kids and everything like that. Obviously, you mentioned before we even got on that your kids were sick, so you had to deal with that before even doing this conversation. So how do you balance all that?
I don't. I don't. I think that's the thing too, is letting people into your vulnerability. I could not do this without my team. I have a team behind me and I have systems. So, like today, I heavily rely on email and my Google Calendar and Siri reminders. We have systems in place. But going back to my team, it's realizing that the greater impact we want to have, the more that we have to rely on our support system. I've got an amazing staff. I have social media help. I've got logistical help. I've got assistant coaches. You've actually interviewed two of my assistant coaches that have done workshops for us, Carly Messer and Nicole Erickson. So it's leaning on your support system and, collaboration and even in those moments where, okay, sure, we're talking about, I have these people that help me, physically run my business. It's also an emotional support to be able to have that support system. And I can't preach it enough, is vulnerability. I'm not doing this alone. And there are moments where it's incredibly hard. So I love connecting with other people that understand. Yeah, I'm in the trenches with you.
Yeah. No, I think that's a common misconception, is that we seem to have made it, so we figured it out, but there's just more help. Or yes, we are open to asking for more help, and so therefore it looks like we've got it figured out because we're not carrying the burden by ourselves. And I think that's such a valuable lesson to teach and to learn. As we wind down, I got one more question I want to ask you before I kind of let you share where my listeners can find you. But who do you think you'd be today if you didn't find mental skills coaching?
Oh man, that is something I've never really considered. I think everyone ends up where they're meant to be in the end. Even if it's, on your deathbed and you realize the impact that you've had, if you can't get it wrong. So even if I wasn't doing this, I think that we all have an innate sense of purpose to, I always say, walking each other home. I think about the people that have come in and out of my life, whether it's been brief or long, whether it was mental performance coaching or working in business or marketing, or, if I used to be a barista. If I'm serving coffees, it's like, how do you treat the people around you in the time that God has given you, and you can't get it wrong? So I guess I've never considered that, because in my mind, it's whatever it is that I find myself doing, I know that if I just show up authentically and serve, good things will happen.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Coach AB, this has been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. Where can my listeners connect with you, follow your journey, see what you got going next, and if they're looking for some workshops or some of the things that you offer, connect with you?
Yeah, the best way to connect with us on Instagram at Fearless Fastpitch, or on Facebook at Fearless Fastpitch. We post a lot of great tips and nuggets. You can also subscribe to our Mental Tip Monday email, and that's on all of our social channels. We have lots of different links where you can find where to subscribe. And for your listeners too, if this is something that you're wanting to explore, a great place to start, we have a PDF guide. It's our parent guide to get started with this. That's also linked in our social channels. It's called Conversations to Create Confidence. And so if this is something that you're wanting to explore, I would say that's kind of my number one recommendation to dive into this world.
No, I definitely recommend checking that out, guys. Make sure you follow along with her journey and see some of those tips. There's some really good stuff going out there. Coach AB, again, thank you so much for joining me today. I loved every moment of it. So as always, guys, keep reaching for the stars, fall flat on your face. But remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.